The last philosopher we'll talk about is Thomas Reid. He lived from 1710 to 1796. He was a Scottish philosopher, and he liked to think of himself as a common sense philosopher. So one of his major goals was to align the rigorisms of empiricism with everyday, ordinary, common sense philosophy, and he didn't think there should be any conflict between those two views. With Reid's common sense take of philosophy, he doesn't actually think it makes sense to common sense or to empiricism to say that objects aren't truly, for example, red. Those secondary qualities that John Locke had decided were properties of how we perceive objects rather than properties of the external world itself. Reid says Locke is thinking about it in the wrong way. Instead, we should think of redness as a property that really belongs to objects, and then just say that the redness of objects causes a certain sensation in me. That sensation in me isn't a red sensation. Instead, it's the object itself which is red. So you remember that for John Locke, red and all the other secondary qualities are just the way in which my mind represents objects. So ultimately, something like red is just a property of my sensation. On the other hand, for John Locke, red doesn't belong in objects themselves as a true inhering property. I can say a ball is red if what I mean is I represent it as red with my perceptual system. What belongs to the object itself, though, is properties like its spatial location, its shape, and its movement. Now, Thomas Reid wants to almost entirely reverse this view. To align more with common sense, he wants to say, well, it doesn't make sense to say that a representation in my mind is red. When I'm thinking of the ball or perceiving the ball, there's not some red thing in my mind. There is a particular sensation, but the sensation is not what's red. Instead, what is red is the ball itself. And when I look at the red ball, a certain unnameable sensation emerges in my mind. But that unnameable sensation is not itself a red thing. Red things are real things in the world, like balls, which contain a color, and that color causes a certain sensation in me, which maybe I could call something like that sensation which represents red objects. If we were to modernize this view with language that wasn't available to Reid, maybe we would say something like, red is a specific microstructure or chemical combination which causes in us a certain representation. So interestingly, even Reid isn't quite willing to say that our minds represent the world exactly as it is, but in terms of gaining knowledge, he is able to say, when we have that sensation, we say that the world is red, and the world really is red. And so in that sense, he is a proponent of common sense. So Reid is going to admit that red objects are not really the way they look to us. It's just that the sensation that we have when we look at red things is not the same as what it means for something to be red. What it means for something to be red is just to cause that special sensation, which is not itself a red thing. Red things are just the objects in the world. Now, Reid goes on to discuss several of his reasons for wanting to take this common sense view and to apply even what for Locke are secondary qualities of perception to the objects themselves. Here are 3 reasons that he gives in this discussion. Number 1, Reid will say it's not possible for us to truly believe or to experience skepticism of the external world. Berkeley, for example, really believed that once we get used to thinking of the world around us as just this set of perceptual experiences created and maintained by God, that we would see the world in that way, we would experience ourselves as free, and experience the world as a world where we can see God's mind active in the creation of the world all around us. Even John Locke's point of view is too skeptical for Thomas Reid. He doesn't think we can really think of red as anything other than something that belongs to objects. Another argument given by Reid is the idea that we are only able to survive in the world by interacting with its real objects. If I see a red stop sign in front of me, and I'm separating in my mind the shape of the stop sign from the color of the stop sign, or thinking about how this stop sign is just a manifestation of God's divine will, or I'm thinking about this stop sign as just a manifestation of God's divine perception, by the time you've realized you need to stop, you've probably hit the car in front of you. Finally, Reid makes a theistic argument, arguing that it's a sort of impiety or disrespect to God to take the perceptual system that God gave us and the way that God disposed us to see the world and to try to rearrange it. God wouldn't have given us the inclination to see the world in this way if that wasn't the way God wanted to design us to experience the world. That last argument has something in common with Descartes' argument that our perception of the world basically represents the world correctly as the world is. Basically represents the world as it is. So we've talked now about Locke, Berkeley, and Reid, and I hope that you can see ways in which they have three different approaches to solving those skeptical problems that were introduced by philosophers like Sextus, Hume, and Descartes. Hopefully you also have a sense of which of these appeals to you the most, or how you would try to solve those same skeptical problems. Hopefully you are also starting to formulate a view on which of these solutions you think works the best, or maybe you're developing your very own view of how these problems could be solved.